A while back, we did a program with the Palomar giant scale radio-controlled model airplanes. At that time, there were some amphibious airplanes there, and that group invited us to come to Otay Lake today and do a program on float planes, giant scale, float, and amphibious radio-control models. So that's where we're at today, and let's take a look at some of these amphibious and float model airplanes. Welcome once again to Captain Fred's Aviation Theater. Today we're at Otay Lake with giant scale amphibious radio control model airplanes. And our first guest is Tom Gridley, and that's a very historic name. In your history books you'll remember "You may fire when ready, Gridley." Is that a relative?
That, I believe, is a shirt-tail relative, yes.
Tell us about this giant amphibious airplane that you have here.
This was a scale model that I conceived from pictures that I saw of the exact plane that flies as a water bomber up in Canada.
So it is a real airplane?
It is presently operating in Canada to fight fires.
And what is the name of it?
It's called the Martin Mars. It was designed by the Martin Company in the 1930s. And
Martin is a famous name with amphibious airplanes.
That's correct, and he was commissioned to design a plane that would fly transport troops in the war.
And when was this plane first built, the actual airplane itself?
I believe this one was built in the late 1930s, and test flights were commissioned about in the early 1940s.
And it was originally designed to be a troop carrier?
A troop carrier, troop and material transport, yes.
And it is now used as, what, a water bomber?
A water bomber, right.
For fighting forest fires in Canada.
That's correct.
Okay. What about this model? What would you like to tell us?
Well, this is approximately 1/10 scale of the actual plane. The real plane had a 200-foot wingspan, and this one came in at about 12 1/3 feet wingspan. It weighs about
12 1/3 feet wingspan.
Correct. Largely designed around something that would fit in my pickup truck, and basically designed as light as possible so that it'll fly with model airplane engines.
What powers it?
We have 4 36 cubic inch engines.
And what kind of fuel?
Standard glow fuel for model airplane engines.
So it doesn't run on gasoline, it runs on model airplane fuel.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Now, what kind of speed would this model cruise at?
This model is, we attempt to keep it scale, which is, it's not a fast plane. In fact, we've talked to some pilots that have flown the real plane, and he said that he has to count to 10 after he turns the steering wheel before anything happens.
Yeah. I've flown the Fuji blimp. And you pull the wheel back and then you wait for something to happen.
That's right, start counting. And this plane flies that way also.
Well, it's not an acrobatic airplane, it's a workhorse.
It's meant to fly straight and level and go places.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about this airplane?
I just hope weather and everything permitting that we can get a flight in.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next guest is Richard Yerry, who is the builder and owner of this Piper Cub.
J3.
It's not a Super Cub, it's
No,
a Piper Cub.
Piper Cub.
J3. Would you tell our viewers about this model?
This is a quarter scale SIG.
A SIG is a
SIG.
store-bought
That's
model?
yes, that's the manufacturer of the kit. It was a kit, It took me about probably 2 months to build it. I fly it both off land and water. I have an attachment where I can put the wheels I can replace. You know, I've had it about 5 years. I have an OS 160 twin in there. For the power, originally it called for basically a 120, but with the floats for water, 160 is much better. It gives you much more power.
Let me ask you about the floats. In the real airplanes, mostly in Alaska, they have floats, wheels, and skis.
Right.
Now, for this one, it has floats now.
Right.
And do you remove the floats or just add the wheels?
No, I remove them because I have 2 different settings on there for the gear. When I remove the floats, there's another position where the gear straps up under there in place of them. So, the ones with the skis, they actually had wheels, and the skis were put on alongside the wheels.
Under the wheels, and they had a wire from the front of the ski back to the gear to hold it up, so that it wouldn't catch on anything.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
You could put skis on this and take it up to Big Bear and fly it in snow, couldn't you?
Sure.
Or on a frozen lake?
Anytime.
Has anybody ever done that with models?
They do back in the Midwest. I know I've seen in the Model Aircraft magazine where in Michigan especially, they do a lot of ski flying in the wintertime there.
But fortunately here in Southern California, you can fly on floats all year round.
Yeah, that's it. No skis, floats.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Sure. You're welcome.
Our next guest is Oscar Weingart, and he's the owner, builder of this Italian float plane. Would you tell our viewers about it, because it's a very interesting plane?
Okay. In 1912, a man named Jacques Schneider, who was a French playboy and engineer, decided that he wanted to advance the progress of French aviation. So he established a beautiful trophy and a big cash prize called the Schneider Cup. And the rules were that different countries would compete with each other for this cup every year. The country that won would have the race the following year in their country.
Would host it.
Host it. And if any country won it 3 times within a 5-year span, they would get to keep the cup forever and the races would be discontinued. Now this went on with a break for World War I until 1931. Now in the 1931 race, you had entries from Britain, which was the Supermarine racers that later helped with the technology of the British Spitfire that helped to win the Battle of Britain.
Right.
And the Italians had a beautiful new float plane called the Macchi Castaldi, actually. There were 2 people. One was the company, one was the engineer. Now, they weren't ready in time, so the British won the race by default. It was the 3rd time in 5 years, so they got to keep the trophy.
And what year was that?
That was in 1931. However, the Italians kept working on their plane, this Macchi, and the following year they set a speed record with it of 440 miles an hour.
Whoa!
Now that's with all these big floats hanging down.
Yes.
And that was
aerodynamically dirty.
Right, and it was in 1931, which that technology of that day. What they did is they had 2 engines in it, one behind the other, with 2 propellers, one counter-rotating, one driven by each propeller. Now this is sort of a semi-scale model of that airplane. And what we're doing at Lake Elsinore in California, every year now, we have a reenactment of this Schneider Trophy race. And we do it with these approximately 1/4 to 1/3 size scale models.
To put things in perspective, this airplane, with those big, dirty pontoons hanging down, flew faster than the P-51 Mustang.
Not only that, but that record still stands for propeller-driven seaplanes even to this day.
Is that
440 miles an hour. So they had good technology, but it was like the Italian sports cars. You know, they're great and they look beautiful and they run fine, but not when you want them to.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have this race December 5th and 6th, the weekend, at Lake Elsinore.
Is it open to the public?
It's open to the public. It's at the Roadrunner RV Park on the north end of the lake on Highway 74. And you'll see a number of Schneider racers from different years. Some are models of the original ones, which were monoplanes and biplanes with wires and struts, you know. I think the winning speed for the first race was something like 60 miles an hour. And over the years, that went up to about 400 miles an hour for the final race.
Very good. Thank you so much for visiting with us today.
You're welcome.
That was very educational. Our next guest is Mark Grand. Mark, would you tell us about the real airplane that this model is copied after?
The real plane, it's named after Supermarine Walrus from Great Britain. This is a 2-inch to the foot scale model of the Supermarine Walrus. It was built in the early 30s, and it was used primarily for a rescue in Great Britain, and it also had seen some observation detail for submarines. It had a wide variety of roles in the World War II also.
You said the word Supermarine.
Yeah.
Is that as in submarine Spitfire?
Yes, it is. Same company.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about this particular model. Why did you choose it?
A friend of mine had a scale free flight. It was much smaller than this, and I threatened to build a larger RC scale model of it. And after several years of doing so, finally decided to build it. It had taken me 10 months from start to finish.
Why did you decide on this airplane?
It's just its uniqueness, amphibious, biplane, and it's a pusher.
Yes, it's a pusher, it's a biplane, and amphibious. Now,
Correct.
The way it looks now, it's a seaplane,
Correct.
but it is amphibious.
Yes, it
You can
does.
add wheels.
Yes, I have wheels that plug into the side of the plane for land, takeoff, and landings.
So that it could land in the water and then taxi up onto the tarmac.
Right, the full-size ship, yes, it had retracts that retracted up into the bottom of the wings for water takeoff or landings, and then the retracts would come down and taxi up on land or take off on land.
How big is the wingspan on this?
This is just over 91 inches.
Which is how many feet?
Just under
60
8
inches
feet.
is 5 feet.
Yeah, it's just under 8 feet. It's 7 feet, 9 inches, 10 inches.
And how much does it weigh?
It weighs 27¼ pounds.
Now that's pretty heavy for a model.
Yes, it is.
So what kind of an engine powers it?
I am using a Futaba YS120. It produces approximately 2.4 horsepower at 16,000 RPM.
And it runs on what kind of fuel?
Methyl alcohol and nitromethane.
And in miles per hour, what would this model fly at?
It's not terribly fast. My estimate would be maybe 40, maybe 50 in a dive, maybe.
Well, it was a utility airplane, not built for speed.
Right, correct.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell our viewers about this model?
Not that I can think of.
Or about the airplane itself?
Well, the plane that I built, did the mold work for the fiberglass hull. The engine itself is also fiberglass. The cockpit cabin is fiberglass. The wingtip floats are fiberglass, and the tail wheel water rudder is fiberglass.
So it should be waterproof.
It should be. It gets a little water in where the landing gear plugs in.
Okay. Thank you very much for visiting with us today.
My pleasure.
Our next visitor is from out of town. His name is Buddy Person. Would you tell our viewers where you're from and what you're doing here today?
I'm from Simi Valley, California, and I'm here for the Float Fly, a wonderful event down here I'd love to go to every year.
Tell us about your airplane. It's a Super Cub?
This is a J3. This is a
Oh, a J3, not a Super Cub.
This is a J3 Cub. It's a Bud Nosen quarter scale. It's a 110-inch wingspan. I got the scheme from a friend of mine who went down to the Coast Guard and he went through all their archives. And he came across an L4 that they had done up in this scheme.
Which is an observation plane.
It's an observation plane. It wasn't on floats. We couldn't find any documentation of a Coast Guard L4 on floats, but the scheme looked so good, and I always fly it off of wheels, and everybody said, you know, you got to put that on floats and fly it off the water, and that's what I do. I go to probably about 6 float flies a year in the Southern California area.
Now this plane has a special feature for night flying. Would you tell our viewers about that?
Sure. As you can see, this day is a beautiful day. One of my most favorite things is when the sun goes down. I'll take this off the water in the dead of night. It's got a rotating beacon. It's got the wingtip lights.
Functional rotating beacon?
A functional rotating beacon. It's got the wingtip lights, and it's got a landing light that's in the scale position on the wing. It's all controlled from the transmitter. So as soon as the sun goes down, you taxi it out and you take it off. Now, of course, this airplane isn't an aerobatic airplane, and it doesn't burn holes in the sky, so you're just basically in the middle of the night just flying big circles above you. You don't get it too far away from you because the lights do get dim as you go far away, but the lights are plenty bright, and as long as there isn't somebody there blowing your concentration, I'll sit and do touch and goes all night long.
Now, you don't have runway lights like at an airport.
Right.
Is the landing light bright enough to actually facilitate a landing?
Yeah, that's a 6-volt halogen bulb, and it has a 7.2-volt battery pack on the inside, so that bulb is brighter than most flashlights. Flying off the water, of course, is very easy because when you're standing at the edge of the water, you know there's nothing else out there but runway. There's a couple night flies that we do have where we fly off a runway where the runway is lit.
So you're not the only airplane that flies at night?
No, to go to the float fly, there's 3 or 4 friends of mine that fly off at night. But there's one club in particular in the San Fernando Valley. They're big into night flying, and almost everybody in the club will fly at night. And you go to their night flies, and there will be at any given time 6 to 7 airplanes in the air all at the same time night flying. And you don't dare take your eye off of yours because you're going to be flying somebody else's, and we know what's going to happen then.
Very interesting.
I love flying at night. It's so scale. If this airplane is flying and a Cessna is coming out of an airport right below it, and the 2 are flying at you, you'd never know which one was scale and which one was the model.
Today you're at Otay Lake.
Otay Lake. I also fly at Lake Cachuma in Santa Barbara.
Lake Cachuma?
Lake Cachuma in Santa
Barbara.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I fly at Santa Fe Dam, which is in Sierra Madre, I believe.
Where's Sierra Madre?
It's off of the 210 and the 605, right in that area right there. They have Santa Fe Dam.
What city would be there?
I think it's called Sierra Madre, I think.
It is?
Or actually, Irwindale, I think is what the city of Irwindale.
So that would be up Riverside County?
Right, up there, right. Mm-hmm. I fly there. I'm a member of the Ventura County Comets, and we fly at Lake Casitas in Ojai. Mm-hmm. And we have 3 float flies there a year, and the 2 at Lake Cachuma. There's another one in Prado, which is down in Chino, right by the Chino Air Museum.
Yes.
There's a float fly down there, and those are the ones I go to.
Do they have a lake there that they fly?
They have a little reservoir right there that we fly at. Nice float fly every year.
Actually, you don't need a big lake, just something to take off and land.
Right, especially with an airplane like this, which takes off with minimal airspeed, flies very slow, it's very controllable, and I can fly this just about anywhere.
Realistically, you could go to some farmer who had a pond on his farm, and as long as it was big enough for you to take off and land, you could fly there.
Which I have done in Moore Park.
Oh, is that right?
There's a farm out there, and when the rains come, where the farmer's cattle graze, it ends up being a pond of water, and it's probably about 100 yards long. And I went to him one time and I asked him, I said, can I fly off of your pond? And he said, well, when my cattle is on the other side of the fence, I'll call you, which he did, and I went and flew and spent the whole day there. And unfortunately, I was by myself, so I didn't have anybody to share it with.
Mm-hmm. So that's a possibility that the float flyers might want to lease or build your own aquatic park where you could fly.
Sure.
And then you wouldn't have to worry about only once a year or getting a permit or environmental impact or anything like that.
There is one place, it's in Camarillo. It's called the Camarillo Condors. It's a club in Camarillo. They have a runway for fixed gear aircraft, and then they have a thing called the pond. And every Thursday, they fly their float planes off of the pond. The rest of the days of the week, they do their boats.
Maybe that's a sign of things to come.
Yeah, I wish. It'd be nice.
That'll do it for today. Thank you for visiting with us.
You're welcome.
As always, this is Captain Fred saying, I love airplanes and I honor the people who fly them. And that includes float planes, too. Well, that's our show for today. We hope you enjoyed it. We certainly enjoyed bringing it to you. I'd like to thank the San Diego Aerospace Museum, the first place to visit when you come to San Diego, for bringing Aviation Theater to you. Until next week, this is Captain Fred saying, God bless America and happy landings!